All right, thank you all for coming out this morning. Obviously, this is a very hot topic, important issue. A lot of you have been reading in the papers issues with the flood maps. And so let me just tell you something about myself. I'm Sean Riley. I'm a professional engineer with Coastal Engineering Company in Orleans. Coastal Engineering has provided services on Cape Cod and in Chatham since 1976. I myself have been working with Coastal Engineering since 2000. And so I've become informed on the unintended impacts that property owners may potentially face should these maps occur. This committee was formed by a group of concerned property owners in order to inform all of you of the unintended effects that the local bylaws will have on your property rights. If you received a letter, your property was either identified in a flood zone now, moving into a flood zone with the revised flood maps, or you're within 100 feet of the revised flood maps. I'll discuss each of these scenarios and what they mean to you as property owners. Basically, there's two groups of you, those that are going to be in a flood zone, which has a lot of insurance impacts, and those of you that will be within 100 feet of a flood zone, which will affect your ability to build and build out your properties. John is here from Rogers & Gray, and Rogers & Gray Insurance. He'll be answering any questions you may have about insurance, and also the Biggert Waters Act, which we'll get into, which is going to phase out the subsidies that the federal government gives to the insurance industry. I'd ask that you please hold your questions to the end. This presentation is only about 20 minutes, and we have plenty of time to answer all of your questions. We can look at each of your individual properties at the end, but again, I'd ask that you hold your questions till the end. This is a quick overview of what we're going to present this morning. We're going to discuss the National Flood Insurance Program, which each community on Cape Cod has joined in order to receive flood assistance during disasters and also for flood insurance. The status of the map changes and the anticipated date of adoption and the efforts that our Massachusetts representatives are working on to delay their adoption. We're going to talk about the Biggert Waters Act, which I said will phase out the government subsidies to the National Flood Insurance Program, and ultimately to educate you on what a flood map is and to help you better understand where your property lies in relation to the flood zone. Most importantly, we'll discuss the potential impacts to you as property owners. The National Flood Insurance Program is a federal program that was created by Congress to mitigate any future losses nationwide. The flood insurance program is supposed to provide affordable, the key word, federally backed flood insurance protection for property owners. In order to evaluate a property's risk, FEMA has created flood insurance rate maps. Your insurance premiums are established based on your potential risk and where your buildings are in relation to each of the flood zones shown on these flood maps. I won't get into the methodology today. That's where they're at now in Congress and at the Senate and at the federal level, discussing the methodology that's been used on the East Coast. They're saying they use the Pacific Coast methodology, so they're questioning these maps and their validity. But I won't get into that today. I'll be able to answer any of your specific questions afterwards. The current maps in Chatham were last revised, a portion of the town in 1998 and the rest of the town in 1992. So the revisions are well overdue. They've been working on these revisions since 92 and 98, coming up with new data, new methodologies for determining these flood zones. So they've been working on these revised maps for years. They had said 4 or 5 years ago that they were going to be coming out and said they'd be coming out the next year and then the next year. And this is the closest we've come to seeing the revised maps be adopted. FEMA released the updated draft maps May of last year. After that was followed a 90-day appeal period in which homeowners, property owners, towns could appeal the methodology of these maps, in which several towns around the state, Marshfield, Situate, most recently Rockport, appealed the maps and was successful in that appeal. Chatham did a verbal appeal, but not anything with any substantial teeth to prevent the adoption. So the appeal period is over for challenging these maps if you haven't appealed them by October 17th of last year. Only 3 appeals submitted on Cape Cod were acknowledged, and the revisions were made on those specific properties. As previously stated, the flood insurance rate map reflects a property's risk to flooding during the 100-year storm event. Where your property falls on the map and its relation of your building to the flood zone determines your potential risk and ultimately your premium rates. To better understand a flood map, I have an illustration that I'd like you to get acquainted with. We're going to spend a little time on this. The flood map has many different scenarios. You've got your everyday sea level, your tidal area, and what they do is they use a calculated flood event for a 100-year storm to determine where the flood levels will go, the wave heights within these shoreline areas. And this is one scenario of what a section of a flood map may look like. You have a velocity zone, which is noted as a VE zone, and that's in areas where you have wave heights in excess of 3 feet. They've determined that if you're in a velocity zone with a wave height in excess of 3 feet, if you have a house in there, it has a potential to knock the house off the foundation. That's why you'll see houses built up on piles, elevated above the velocity zone. Give you a quick graphic of this is a typical house that you would see that meets the standards for being within a velocity zone. Come on in. How you doing?
Good, yourself.
Again, there are 2 main types of flood zones. There is a velocity zone and an A zone. The A zone, or the AE zone, as referred to in the new maps, is where the wave heights drop below 3 feet in height. And the next illustration shows a typical house remodel for a house that would fall within an A zone, remodeling it to bring it to current code. The foundation elevation will be raised up so that you're above the flood zone, and there's flood vents that they put in the foundation face to stabilize the flood waters. Also, you see what's called the limit of base flooding. So that is the extent of what is considered the flood zone, where the flood zone touches down on ground, and it's usually determined by elevation and the elevation of your topography within that area. The obvious implications to homeowners and property owners are increased insurance rates and premiums. If the flood zones are moving landward and are at higher elevations, the greater your risk for flood damage, and so the premiums will go higher. For those of you with houses within the flood zones who see major increases to the premiums should these maps be adopted, there are several things that you can do to limit the increase in those premiums. Property owners will have to do a cost-benefit analysis with their insurance agents, engineers, contractors, in order to find out what the savings would be for potentially filling in an existing basement. adding flood vents into the existing foundation, relocating your existing utilities from your basement or lower level to above the flood elevation. And the biggest cost benefit usually comes from raising the house and installing a new foundation, as you saw in that previous slide, to a higher elevation. And we can discuss that further in detail with John from the insurance company as to how about going forward with that with an elevation certificate. The not so obvious effects of the revised flood maps are related to the Chatham local bylaw. The state Massachusetts regulates work that takes place within the flood zone itself and within 100 feet of the other defined resource areas through the Wetlands Protection Act. Those other resource areas are marshes, bogs, streams, the typical wetland resources that you would associate that require protection. The State Wetlands Protection Act grants authority to local conservation commissions to regulate work within the flood zones. Chatham has granted, within its local bylaw, the authority for conservation to regulate work an additional 100 feet from the flood zone. Chatham is the only town on Cape Cod that considers the 100 feet that extends beyond the flood zone as a resource area. Just so we're clear, some of the other towns on Cape Cod also regulate work that can be done within 100 feet of a flood zone. What makes Chatham different is that they consider this 100 feet beyond where the flood zone ends a resource area. All right, similar to a bog, a stream, a creek, a wetland, a vegetated wetland, which affords that area a much higher level of protection than any other town on Cape Cod. The first 50 feet beyond the flood zone is considered a no disturb zone, which means that for any work to take place within that zone, a property owner would be required to file a notice of intent with the Conservation Commission and provide an alternatives analysis explaining why the work must take place within that no disturb zone. That's the first unintended consequence of these maps. The second, and equally if not more concerning than the first, is the Chatham zoning bylaw is directly tied to the flood insurance rate maps. Chatham has a zoning overlay district called the Coastal Conservancy District, which restricts the construction of residential dwellings within that district. So when these maps come into effect and the flood zone moves landward, any properties that fall within this area in here, the new area within the flood zone, you will not be able to build a house without a variance. From my knowledge and from discussions with zoning board members, there has not been a variance issued within Chatham, within the Conservancy District, for a new house. So if you have a piece of property that is currently outside of the flood zone and it's moving into the flood zone, you will not be able to build a house on that property. You could go out today, pull a building permit on that property, and build your house. But when these flood maps come into effect, essentially the zoning bylaw goes with that. And it's an unintended consequence, but it's a fact that everybody should know that abuts, and that's why those people that are identified as within 100 feet of the revised map flood areas were called out by this committee to understand that fact. So this is not the intention of the properties for these properties when the bylaw was created. So what you can do, within a flood zone, you can contact your insurance agent, engineer, contractor, discuss your options to reduce your premiums. As I said before, you can look at doing an elevation certificate, and what that will do is evaluate your risk. The insurance agent uses those to evaluate your risk, and also they can punch in different numbers within that elevation certificate into their computers and find out how to reduce your premiums, whether your first floor level is raised, whether utilities are relocated, whether you add flood vents, all the different scenarios. And it would be up to you as homeowners to do this cost-benefit analysis to see if it's worthwhile to raise your house. We've heard, and most recently I just heard, the highest number of predicted rates of $65,000 a year for flood insurance. The highest that I'd heard before that is $50,000 a year, and that's only for $250,000 worth of coverage. Okay? So these rates, with the subsidies being taken away from the government through the Biggert Waters Act, and with the expansion of the flood zones, is going to relate into a much higher premium for all of those of you that find yourselves within a flood zone. And they're going to phase out these subsidies. We'll get into how long it's going to take to phase out these subsidies from the government. For work within 100 feet of a flood zone, we had a suggestion at Thursday session. We had a session here on Thursday to amend the Chatham bylaw by freezing the location of the current Coastal Conservancy District's boundary and keeping the location of the Conservancy District boundary as it exists today, and in the location that the town voted to bring in over 10 years ago. Not sure that the town, when they brought in the Conservancy District, had any idea that the expanse of, when these revised maps come in, the expanse of where this Conservancy District will envelop. And we'll look at the maps of where these flood zones are coming more landward in a minute. A second suggestion was to amend the Chatham bylaw in regards to the wetlands bylaw and how it protects the land within 100 feet of the flood zone. You can do this by getting involved with this committee and reaching out to friends and neighbors within the Chatham community just to educate them on the impacts that we're going to see should these maps be adopted this July. Right now, Congressman Keating is working at the federal level to, want to come up and switch over, to Congressman Keating is working at the federal level. The Senate is already on board to put a delay in these maps. The House of Representatives is fighting tooth and nail. He is working as a congressman to get the House on board to try to delay these maps. As I said before, Rockport has made amendments to their flood maps using a different methodology. Keating is looking to use that as a precedent to delay the implementation of these maps for the rest of Massachusetts. The Plymouth County has already put a delay in the adoption of their maps for a year while they review the pending cases before them with Marshfield and Situate. So they've already pushed their maps out to 2015, and hopefully Congressman Keating can push them in the right direction for the rest of Massachusetts. But assuming that he can't, and these maps come into effect, can I help you?
You can try. It's not working. It worked so well the other night. Oh. That's where the presentation was.
Please bear with us. There we go. Should come up.
Why is it not reading?
Hold on. There it is.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, just lost it.
Okay, hold on,
There we go.
Just minimize that.
All right. We are back.
I don't know why that's there.
All right. So, let me get rid of this stuff here. What we're seeing here is the Cape Cod Commission website. And, okay, on the left-hand side of this, you're seeing what is the existing flood zones in Chatham. And we discussed the velocity zone was the zone that had wave heights in excess of 3 feet, and the A zones were the zones that had wave heights less than 3 feet. The yellow areas represent the A zones as they exist today on the left side of the screen. The red is the velocity zones as they exist today on the left-hand side of the screen. The middle is the proposed changes and where the new maps show the velocity zones and the flood zones. And what you're seeing over on the right-hand side of the screen is the blue is existing, the purple are all new areas that will be coming into, I'd love to get rid of this thing. They will be coming into the existing flood zones. Let me jump over to a different map for you. This map here is the Chatham GIS. This is provided by your town's GIS department. And what it shows, the blue is the existing flood zone. The shaded area in here to the perimeter of the green is the proposed limit of the flood zone. And this green line is the new 100-foot jurisdiction of conservation from that extended flood zone. For any of you that don't know where we're at here, this is the community center, which you're in right now. This is the Rotary. This is St. Christopher's Church. All right, and this is the parking lot. So essentially, when these flood zones move landward, this is all going to be in the Conservancy District, no build zone for residential houses, and 100 feet from that will be the jurisdiction of Conservation Commission. So essentially, for anybody to do work on the theater or the church, they'd have to go to Conservation for approval. And they have a 50-foot no disturb zone where nothing can be done within that zone as far as conservation regulates. One of the largest areas that I've seen that will be impacted from a residential standpoint is over on Eastward Point. Let's jump over there. So the blue again is the existing flood zone, and the shaded area is the revised flood zone, and the green is 100 feet from that flood zone. So essentially, if you own a house or a property within the new flood zone, you will not be able to have any new construction within that zone without a variance. And within 100 feet, or within 50 feet of that, without a variance, as far as the setbacks are to the Conservancy District. And within 100 feet, you'd have to go to conservation for approval for any work within that area or within 100 feet of that area. So from the previous map, you can see, if I can zoom out. Let me see if I can reload this, this link. All right. I'm having trouble with the Cape Cod Commission site. We'll go back to the town site. It's not as easy to see the changes on the town site, but essentially the striped blue is your existing flood zones, and the lighter blue areas are the encroachment. The gray areas are their encroachment of the new flood zones. With that, I'll open it up to any questions you may have. I'll be glad to look at each of your individual properties as they relate to the flood zone. But if you have any general questions, again, we have insurance issues, we have zoning issues with the constructability within the Conservancy District and within the 50-foot setback, the way that the local bylaws are written now. And the third is the jurisdiction of conservation 100 feet from a flood zone that the State Act does not afford. So I'll open it up to any questions you may have.
I just want you to define how much the water rises in your flood zone. You know,
Each,
does it go
yep.
10 feet above
Nope.
average or 20 feet?
That's a great question, and it's variable throughout the coastline. The coastline shape and is different. You may have steep cliffs over on Eastward Ho Country Club.
I'm not answering that question.
Yep.
How high does the Atlantic Ocean have to go up to create this flood zone
Oh.
in 100 years? How
In a-
high?
Yep. No.
Or,
Yep. 10 feet. 10 feet is an average, and 10 feet above sea level is the average. Okay.
Is that
I-
what you did
that-
used to calculate this?
No, they've changed the calculations.
So then how high?
The-
15 feet?
No. Let me explain. It's completely variable, and it's dependent on the topography of the land as to how high it goes. You know, when a wave comes in, the wave crests at a different elevation based on the topography and how the landform is. But essentially, what they do. Let me jump back to the presentation and show you this slide here. There's a still water, there's a 100-year still water elevation, and in Cape Cod Bay, that elevation is between elevation 9 and 10, okay? That's 9 and 10 feet above sea level, okay? From that, above that level, which is this red line here, above that level, you can have wave heights and wave run-up that go another 12 feet above that. All right?
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, one other thing, basic question. This 100 feet, that's an arc, a horizontal 100 feet.
That is a horizontal.
Now, if you drew an arc 100 feet out from mean sea level or whatever, you drew an arc. Suppose I lived on a cliff vertically 100 feet up.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have any problem, would I?
Again, that jumps into the definition of a coastal bank, okay? So if the flood zone hits your coastal bank, okay, it then jumps to the top of that bank or wherever you have a break in that bank. It gets into a complex methodology, but it's less than 1 in 4 feet. As soon as you have a slope break, rise over run of 1 in 4 feet, that is the definition of your top of coastal bank. But I don't want to get off topic here, but that's a completely separate issue from what we're talking about is a flood zone, where the flood zone hits a flat level of land. They have jurisdiction 100 feet further than what the state affords.
But that constitutes your insurance rate. If I'm 100 feet up in the air, I don't have to pay any insurance on flood,
That's correct.
right?
Yep.
All right.
Yes. Yes.
You have a piece of property, say, that is 400 feet long, and 100 feet is in the Conservancy District, but you have no intention of building in the Conservancy District.
No, as long as you are building there, the Conservancy District, all right, if you're not building in the Conservancy District, there's also a 50-foot setback, a coastal Conservancy District setback of 50 feet. So as long as you maintain that 50 feet beyond the Conservancy District when you're building, you do not require a variance.
If you want to do anything within that second 50 feet, I understand the no disturb zone.
Yep.
But if you want to do anything on your property, even put landscaping in or put a fence in or anything, you have to do it before July, basically.
You have to go to conservation to get it. Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. No, that's a good point. If you, that's a very good point. So what people are doing now is they're scrambling to get building permits, okay? Because if you get a building permit, you've got 6 months in which to build within that zone that is now going to be converted into a Conservancy District, all right? So right now, you may be outside of jurisdiction of zoning and conservation. You can go do that work, okay, without having any variances, without having to go to conservation. When these maps are revised and adopted, the regulations are tied directly to those maps, and now their jurisdiction is going to go landward. So we're finding people that, I don't know if Carol's here. No. A woman that I met is inheriting a piece of property from her mother, and she's looking to build a retirement home on it. They have a camp right now, built in the 40s. And she wasn't looking to build that retirement home for another 10 years when she retires. That property, which already has a house on it, is going into the Conservancy District, all right? So she is having to take out money out of her 401k to get a building permit now so that she can build her addition to her house to make it the way she wants it in 10 years when she retires, okay? There really shouldn't be that kind of an impact on residents for something that was created based on an assumed boundary over 10 years ago. All right? Somebody may have purchased a piece of property recently that's outside of the Conservancy District, thinking that they're going to build on it. Okay? They're going to be impacted when the Conservancy District moves and moves landward. That property will now be unbuildable unless they build on it now before these maps are adopted. So that's why we're saying it was discussed that you could freeze the Conservancy District as it where it is. It's not going to impact the town any differently than it has since it was adopted. But if it doesn't change, it will impact those of you that find yourself moving into a Conservancy District. Does that make sense? Yes, in the back? Oh. Go ahead, in the back. Sure.
And then the other question is, given that a huge chunk of Chatham's property tax rolls are being impacted by this, what is the town's stance? I mean, the town is going to lose
Yes.
money for schools, et cetera.
Yes, it is going to be a huge impact on the town because it's going to affect the resale of your houses. If you don't have a federally insured mortgage now and your house is paid off, you're not required by law to have flood insurance. But if you're not making a cash transition when you go to sell this property, they're going to have the burden, if they have a mortgage and they're in the flood zone, they're going to have the burden to pay those super high premiums. So someone may come to your house, look at it, have an evaluation done of what they're going to pay for flood insurance, $10,000, $15,000 a year. They're going to go look at another property. Okay, so it will affect property values. And by adding this additional burden with the Conservancy District moving landward, you're going to affect even more property owners. So that's a very good point. And to get back to your question, the other night we had 2 or 3 selectmen that were here. We had members from the zoning board that were here, planning board. We've got members here now from the planning board. from Conservation. I see a few Conservation members here. So they're aware of this. What you need to do is create a voice in the town. Get people together. I understand that there's a lot of people that are summer residents. They are very interested in this. We've received phone calls, emails. They want copies of this. We're recording this. We're going to post this on YouTube, and people are going to have access to this so they can see this presentation and they can ask more questions and get more involved. But what we're asking you is to sign the sheet, get involved in this, get moving, because you're all going to be impacted. If you're in the flood zone, you're going to be impacted by the insurance. There's no reason to impact the economic base of Chatham by expanding the Conservancy District beyond what was accepted over 10 years ago as the boundary of the Conservancy District, just because the federal insurance rate maps are moving landward. And we know that the methodology is already being challenged. So I hope I answered your question.
Well, no, you didn't,
What was the question? Is the town getting involved?
but they're kind of late.
They are kind of late. Yeah. They are kind of late in this, and that's why we're here to bring it to everyone's attention. And you as a group need to get together and make a noise to the town. It's not too late, okay? A citizen's petition can be put on the spring warrant, okay, before these maps are adopted, to amend these local bylaws. All right, so it's not too late for you.
So do you have anybody specifically in the town that we need to talk to start this process? Names, things like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's it. We want to get, whoever wants to get involved in this, we want you to come forward and get involved, and we can line up meetings with the town members. You know, if there's only a small amount of people that are concerned, they're not going to have a big voice, but if we have a large contingent of people, how can they not listen?
It's not too late for the conservation, but it's too late for people that are directly in the flood zone.
For the people that are in the flood zone directly, okay, or moving into the flood zone directly, as far as your flood insurance goes, there are things that you can do to reduce your premiums, okay? There's nothing that you can do to change the zoning without completely eliminating the Conservancy District, all right? So there's nothing that you can do from a zoning standpoint other than completely changing the Conservancy District and getting enough of a vote to eliminate the Conservancy District. All right, so what we're looking to do, or what was recommended at the last meeting by some of the residents, is to, hey, let's at least put a freeze on the Conservancy District while the town can evaluate, you know, and take a look at, hey, maybe the Conservancy District doesn't make sense anymore. You know, and maybe the people that are in the flood zone that don't have the ability to add additions to their houses, you know, Conservation now has a huge jurisdiction and huge grab on the area. They have jurisdiction within that area too. So why do we have to have a zoning bylaw that restricts building when Conservation has their own restrictions? So maybe it's a chance to revisit the Conservancy District. But right now, the suggestion was to just freeze it. Hey, let's just stop. If these maps come in, let's just stop it where it is. Don't let it go landward. Hope I answered your question.
That's a good idea. Let's stop it and freeze it right now, so all the Chathamites, the town government, we want to stop it, just so you know.
Yes.
Is Congressman Keating working to delay the implementation of the maps or to kill the mapping process entirely by questioning the methodology that FEMA uses?
That's a good question. He is looking, first and foremost, to delay the adoption of the maps. Okay? Ultimately, he is looking to reevaluate the methodology that's used. They feel that the methodology that he used is extreme, and the boundaries of the flood zone have been pushed way beyond where they should go using the methodology that they've used. So they have they've hired UMass Dartmouth to do a complete evaluation of how the maps were derived, the scientific methodology behind it, the aerial topography that was used. So they're moving in that direction to make sure that the right methodology was used. So we could ultimately see a revision in how the methodology was used. But right now, he's looking to just put a hold on implementing these maps until we really understand what's going on.
Isn't the fact that FEMA never did the impact study on the adoption of the maps enough to at least kill, if not, at least delay, if not kill this whole process?
That's at the federal government level, and as you know, things don't always make sense. So if they're looking to push, as I said, FEMA is $25 billion in debt right now. Okay, the government's looking to get out after Katrina and after Sandy. They're $25 billion in debt, and they want to get out of the flood insurance business. So they're looking to get some money. In the back.
Can you please tell us the specific URLs of the website?
Yes. Yep, absolutely. This map right here, which shows all the properties, all the zones, this is a really great tool. This is your Town of Chatham's tool. And all you have to type in is Chatham, do a web search for Chatham GIS. Okay? If you do the web search for Chatham GIS, you'll get a link, a direct link to this map. And there's a tool here, which individually I'll show you. But for example, there's a tool here that you can find your address. Just by typing in the first few letters, it'll come up with Main Street. It'll come up with all the parcels on Main Street. So if I was to do 38, click on that.
We're going to send everybody the.
We could send them the link, but it's easy to find. We can send you the link, but essentially it zooms right into the area. So Chatham GIS, Google that, and that'll get you right to this website.
And who are the Chatham people taking the lead on this? Are selectmen any?
No, it's not the selectmen. It's just a group of individuals right now that want to educate the rest of you that are.
So
So
contact them?
you can contact through me.
Oh, okay.
Through me, we'll pull this all together and align everybody up and get you pointed in the right direction. In the back.
Yeah, I guess that's one of my questions. I mean, how do you really get traction so it's not people talking about it? How do you actually get it from?
You can talk to me. I mean, the next step would be to have an attorney draft up the changes to these amendments and get a petition established, a citizen's petition. All right, that citizen's petition would then be submitted to get on the town warrant to make specific changes to the zoning bylaw, and then it would come up for a vote at town meeting, and then you need to get the mass of people to agree to vote to make these changes. So that I think it's 2/3. Is it 2/3 vote or 3/4? It's 3/4 vote to make a change to a bylaw. So, and it's only voting residents.
Sean, I have a question. I think in the last newscast, we saw the big storms, how Marshfield got so hit so hard with all the flooding, but yet they were able to stop this in their community.
Yes, they weren't able to stop it. They were able to hold off the adoption while they evaluate. They have an appeal. They made the appeal during the appeal period, so they're still evaluating their criteria. During the appeal period last year, the 90 days after the revised maps came out for review, they were able to get an appeal in. So basically, they're holding off the implementation and the adoption of these maps until they can review what was submitted. So they haven't gotten themselves out of the woods yet.
Right, I understand that, but I guess I don't want to really backtrack, but I don't want to understand why Chatham didn't take any stance then,
Why Chatham?
why we didn't earlier.
There really wasn't enough time. It was as though everybody got bushwhacked with this, in my opinion. 90 days to do a complete evaluation of something that they've been working on for the last 10 years. I mean, really, it really didn't give you enough time to evaluate. So if they weren't right on this and people weren't making a huge stink about, how would you know that these maps weren't bad? You know?
Well, I just saw how much impact the floods had on the Town in Marshfield
Yeah.
constantly.
I grew up in Situate, so I know exactly what you mean along that coastline. So, but unless you really dissect these maps and understand the implications of where these flood zones are going, you can't really understand the nuances that are involved in this. So it had to be someone that got involved at the beginning and really dissected these. So, yes.
Hi,
It's in May, correct? Second week in May?
And is the warrant currently open?
Yes, till March 7th? March 7th? March 5th? So 3 weeks.
So now,
Doesn't give you a lot of time.
now is the time to get an article.
Now is the time to get an article.
And is this flood map considered a zoning change?
It would be, it wouldn't be a zoning change, it would just be something that's tied to the current bylaw. Basically, the way that the bylaw reads is the flood zone, or the Conservancy District, okay, is per the 1992 or 98 maps, or as most recently amended, okay? So when they're amended, it basically tags that zoning to the amended maps. So it isn't a change, it's just something that's happening unintentionally if nothing is done.
So
That it's,
therefore, the article petitions are really to make zoning changes that exist today?
right,
Okay.
yep, yes.
Going back to previous comments, I'm not clear on how we should go forward as residents if we're in these sensitive areas, so to speak. You said go through you. Is that the best way, or is there a team of 2 or 3 people who have taken over leadership of this?
There really isn't anybody that's taken full leadership. We're looking for leaders to take this through and to guide this through. I'm not getting paid for this. I just think it's a good cause.
Well, if people are interested, then now's the time to raise your hand and say, I do.
Yeah. If any of you would like to volunteer to take this thing forward and be the lead on this, there really isn't. I mean, there's a group of people that I'm working with because they have the same concerns that you have. So we will need people to lead the charge on this moving forward. I actually live in Plymouth. I just work in Orleans, and I do a lot of work in Chatham, and I just see this as something that is not right. Okay?
Is a petition the only way to get this on town meeting, or could the zoning board or the selectmen?
Yeah, they could, but I don't know. I don't think there's any time to get that done, to go through those channels at this point. I don't know if there's time to get it done. I mean, you're looking at closing the warrant on March 5th, which is 3 weeks from now. I don't even know if you could get on in front of them, or they could.
Wouldn't they be? I mean, shouldn't they be kind of looking at this and saying, let's put the brakes on this? And I mean, they're the leaders of the town. I mean, are they just going to wait and sit back and?
That's a good question, and that could be something that this committee could pull together and have a meeting directly with them. That hasn't happened yet, so that's a great point. Absolutely, absolutely could get together with them and say, hey, look, hear our voice. We're here. We don't agree with what's going on here, but that hasn't happened to this point. Yes,
We've all read in the newspapers that Brian Howes in New Bedford is questioning the science behind the Pacific Coast or West Coast technology that led to some of these maps. Do you happen to know what that is and have some ability to compare it to East Coast or Cape Cod? Action and that sort of thing, or do we have to wait for?
You've got to wait for the science that's coming out of UMass Dartmouth, the comparison of the 2 models. They're using the Pacific. I know that they use the SWAN model up in Rockport, and that was accepted. It has to do with wave periods and cycles, but essentially they're saying that they used that SWAN model in Rockport to get their maps amended so that the flood zones didn't move as far landward and were at a lower elevation, and they've accepted that methodology over the Pacific Coast method. So they've already set a precedent that, hey, look, we've accepted this other model, and that gave Keating what he needs to say, hey, look, you've accepted this here, and why can't we use that for the rest of us? So they've got the ammo now to go after him, so hopefully they get somewhere with it and remodel using the correct methodology.
Where was that SWAN method?
In Rockport. Yes, in the back.
John, if they don't meet the warrant deadline of March 5th, all discussions end. So I think it's important to understand that you need 10 signatures on a petition to make the warrant stick. So
Okay.
if they want a first action, they
Yep.
need 10 signatures submitted by March 5th.
By March 5th.
Signatures have to be verified
So you don't have a lot of time to get this on the warrant. Essentially, you need to have to draft up the amendment, get a petition, 10 signatures, and get it on the warrant. But that's really just the start, because once you get it on the warrant, doesn't mean it's going to get voted in. You really have to, the group would have to get the word out there that it's going to impact the economy of all of Chatham, really. I mean, if you look at the big money in Chatham, where is it? Where are the highest priced homes? Right on the coastline. Who's paying the highest taxes? Right on the coastline. So the unintended consequence of the Conservancy District moving landward is going to have an economic impact as well. Yes?
Do you have any numbers to tell you how many of those people are residents and how many are not?
I don't. That could be found out, but we sent out letters to 2,000 of you. It was kind of a shotgun blast, because it would take time and money, really, to figure out all that, to get this thing moving in the right direction. Again, as I said, I'm volunteering my time. Drove down from Plymouth today, so to educate you all. Yes.
I'm curious about the letter that came to most of us here. Who's on the committee? There were no names on the letter.
There's a few residents that are not here right now, that are summer people, that are on the committee. It's not, it's not a specific group. It's just.
There were a few that came Thursday that are interested in moving forward with it, and if there are a few that started the committee. There's a few that came on Thursday, and if there are a few today that are interested in getting involved, I think that's a huge start right there. So if there are a few of you that are interested in getting active and helping, I think that right there.
How do we do that? Sign up?
Yeah, let us know.
Sign up,
Let us know
talk to
before
us
you
before you leave today. Please come forward and talk to us.
So you need to come and tell me your name.
Yes.
And then right there is a solid group of citizens that are, probably a good 10 people that need to go to get on that.
And you all know people too, so you people talking to other people, talking to other people. One more in the front.
How is the governor and state government lend its support to towns such as Chatham, Plymouth, on a basis that would give them clout in Washington? Because that's what's needed.
That's a good question. It's the squeaky wheel. You've got to reach out to your selectmen. Selectmen's got to then reach out to them. So it's got to go uphill, but you've got to have a group of people for them to even listen. So.
Well, they're doing that in Florida.
Yeah.
They're going up to the governor and the state.
But you've got to work through your local representatives and work your way uphill to get the voice. And apparently Keating is listening in Congress, so they're here for you. You voted him in.
We have a home that is in a flood zone, but it's not our primary residence. Do we have any voting or signature power in Chatham?
I don't believe so.
I do, I'll help out.
Yay! Yes.
How early before town meeting can you register to vote in town, change your voting address? Because you always have the option of changing it back as well, if you really need to.
That's a great question. I'll be glad to look into it. Anybody know that answer? How long it takes to change your address?
How early? You can change your voting address.
Yeah.
You just can't have two voting addresses.
I'll be glad to find out that question and email it out, the answer.
Is there one voting resident of Chatham here today who would write that provision and get it on the warrant?
We've got a volunteer.
I don't know how to do it, but I'll do it.
We've got another volunteer. You just volunteered.
At minimum, because you get caught up with language, I'm involved in my own town, off Cape, and that's why I changed it down here. But at minimum, the selectmen can have town council help draft it, so you don't get caught up with a lot of confusing amendments, confusing the town meeting on the town meeting floor, thus damning it to potential failure. So I would get the language taken care of in advance.
Great point. Yes.
It seems to me it's very straightforward. Freeze the conservation boundaries as they currently are.
Correct. Yeah, we're going to, well, freeze the zoning boundaries and take a look at the, they're two different things.
Well, I mean,
The-
the flood maps, the government has to deal with.
The government has to deal with the flood maps. Correct. Chatham, we can't do anything about the flood map. Oh, one other point I want to make. At the town meeting, as a community, Chatham has to vote to adopt these maps, okay? I want to make it clear that if Chatham does not vote to adopt these maps, you will be opting out of the National Flood Insurance Program as a community. That is very bad, okay? That takes away your disaster relief and the ability to obtain flood insurance through the NFIP program. So just because you don't vote in the adoption of these maps doesn't mean they're going to go away. All it means is you just handcuffed the community moving forward. So just so you understand, when you see that on the warrant to vote in these maps.
What is your contact information?
My contact information? You can reach me at sriley, R-I-L-E-Y, at, and this is all spelled out, coastalengineeringcompany.com. That's a long one. Do we have any other questions out there? One more question over here.
Having not been here Thursday night, what was the reaction of the select people that were here? Was there any,
Yes.
did they have any input at all?
Yes. Speaking with them, the individuals that were here, they are wholeheartedly behind this. Yep. And endorsing.
May I ask who was here?
Are there any here today?
Are there any selectmen here today? I know Sean Summers was here. And was Tim Roper here?
Yeah, Tim Roper.
And Florence.
And Florence? Yep. Yes.
So those of us who have a house up here who are not eligible to vote, is there someone who can give us a list of people to write to voice our support? I mean, since I don't have a vote.
Right. We have the list of, it's public information. We have your list.
Okay.
I don't know who, we haven't differentiated between who is a voting resident and who is not, but we have a list of all of you that we could share.
But I mean,
And-
everyone in town government, we should just,
Yes. Go speak with your selectmen. Make your voice heard. Talk to your town officials. Talk to your town manager.
is she here?
She is not here. Is Jill here? Jill? No? No? Yes, question.
As a new resident, having just moved from out of state, why can't the selectmen put this issue on the warrant or whatever it is themselves? Why
They-
does it have to come from the people?
Well, they probably could have if this was brought to their attention sooner. Yeah. No, they could have if it was brought to their attention. I mean, did a lot of you know that this was going to impact you? Oh, I understand. No, I understand that. I'm not going to make any excuses, but it could have been done a while ago. But, you know, it's kind of an unintended. This is an unintended. It's not like you're coming in with a change to the bylaws. They were coming in with a change to the bylaws, and everybody was aware of it. This is kind of an unintended impact where, hey, guess what? The flood zones are moving in. Hey, and our bylaw is tied to that.
But what I don't understand is that the town recognizes that this is a major issue.
Yep.
And something needs to be done. Why does something have to come from the citizens to go on this warrant?
It probably could. It could come from the selectmen. I guess my point is I don't think there's enough time at this point. Don't get me wrong. The selectmen can fully endorse what's going on. I don't know that there's time to get a meeting with the selectmen, get a meeting with the zoning board, get a meeting with the planning board. Everybody's input that needs to have them push this through and get it on the spring warrant, okay? The town warrant, where you make the town vote. Because your next town meeting isn't until what, next fall? So if you don't get it in now and the maps are adopted in July, you're going to be out of luck. So I don't think there just isn't time to get it done through that.
The only way to get anything addressed at the next town meeting is to
Is through a citizen's petition, right?
But a selectman
Absolutely. Yep. That would be helpful. And I think there's a few of them in a flood zone. Yes.
Within the coastal district, and you said it, like I'm looking at Main Street here, how do they account for changes in elevation along that line? They're all 15 meters away from the end of the zone, but the one that's 15 meters is 15 meters above.
Yep. It's good. That's a good question. The flood zones themselves are listed by elevation, okay? An elevation reference above sea level, all right? So the way that you determine where that boundary is, that flood zone boundary is you find out where that specific elevation is on the ground, and you follow it around, and that is your flood zone boundary. So it's going to be different in every area along the coastline of Cape Cod, depending on what the topography is and how flat it is and how far in it goes. So it goes up to a certain elevation, and all those elevations are listed on the flood maps. And that could tell you where the extent of that flood zone boundary is. Did that make sense?
Does it also take into effect the contour lines?
Absolutely.
You can measure the height as well?
Yes, absolutely. It fully takes into account the contour lines of where these flood zone maps extend. And that's how they figured out. They got an elevation assigned to it, and what they did was they took that elevation and they ran that elevation landward until it hit the topography at that elevation, that contour elevation, and that is the flood zone boundary.
Who is the they?
They is, Camp Jesser McKee is one of the consultants that work for FEMA. They are the people that did the methodology behind the changing of the maps. FEMA hired outside consultants to do all of this work. So CDM Smith was one of them. And they're the ones that came up with the methodology to use and the scientific data that they ran into these models to develop where the elevations are. And then they translated that onto the topography to find out where those boundaries are, and then those boundaries were put onto a plan view map to show you where those limits are. Does that make sense?
Can you explain to these people, the FEMA, why they're in debt and why if they treat it like a business, they'd have a profit?
Yeah. No, that's a true point. Quickly, I believe they'd be, what, $8 billion in profit? They took the money out and put it into the Treasury at the end of each year that was accumulated. So basically, the money that went into the insurance program was then used for other things. And then when you have these two huge storms, the super events, Katrina and Sandy, all of a sudden you're at a huge deficit. In the back?
Yeah, just so I understand, the most straightforward path is to try to have some just bylaw amendment that freezes the boundaries. Who would be opposed to that, just so I can understand? Are we just fighting apathy? And that's a 75% vote, you said?
Yeah, quite honestly, it's status quo. I don't know who would be against it. Even conservation, on the conservation, working with the bylaw of conservation, not just zoning. Zoning, I can't see any issue with freezing it because it's status. It's what it is today. So it's just a question of getting it in and getting people to understand what it is, so they don't go in uninformed and go, oh, they're trying to change the zoning bylaw again. You know, no way. You know, not even knowing what it means. So that's where it comes in. You guys need to educate these people to put the right vote in.
Worst case scenario, you don't make the deadline, it gets pushed back to the fall. It could be made retroactive, can't it? In other words, if we don't get the
No, I know.
time,
Well, I guess at that point it doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, I don't know that it would help you anyway because you wouldn't be able to do anything up until it was made retroactive. You know, you wouldn't be able to build a house in the Conservancy District until.
Like July to the fall meeting.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's not the absolute end of the world if we don't make it, but it's better if we do.
Well, if the flood maps come into effect in July, then it's going to limit.
Conservation borders can always be put back to the previous.
Yes, if the bylaw is changed, yes, because that'd be the new regulation that they're going to. So.
Sean, one other question, since this is really a zoning article that would be changing, and you mentioned the scrambling around for building permit currently, doesn't zoning, I guess, planning board advertises the zoning change because by law they're required to have a hearing, doesn't that basically put an end to the people scrambling around because they'd be subject to the new zoning if passed by town meeting?
If passed, yes.
If passed,
Yep.
right. So therefore, your May town meeting date
Right.
wouldn't really be the date that you could scramble around for a building permit.
Right.
It
Yep.
would be actually before the advertising date of the planning board's hearing.
Right.
So it's
Yep.
tighter than you think.
Yes. Yes.
I believe if you wait until fall, the requirements for a petition for a warrant are either 100 or 200 signatures. It's only the annual town meeting in May,
Ah, that's a very good point.
10 signatures. So
Very good point.
the wall gets a little higher if you wait till fall.
Yep. Thank you. Question in the back?
Yeah, I'm just interested in you're talking about the validity of the model that they're using to change the flood zone. Have they compared the behavior of storms on the East Coast like Sandy to that model? I mean, did the model predict what happened for Sandy?
No, it actually went in a little further than what it predicted. So, no, not around here, but in New Jersey. So, do we have any other question? And feel free to if you all got the letter, you have our contact information. You've got my contact information. Probably something that skipped your mind right now. You can always come back and ask me the question later. I'll be glad to help you all with that. And if another question?
Say Sandy came and hit the Cape.
Yep.
How far would everything have gone in?
Only God would know. I can't answer that question. Yes.
The current top of the bank is, you said an average, I think it's 10 or 11. What's the new?
The new, I've seen them. Shore Road is a great example of that question. Right, this is Shore Road, Chatham Bar's Inn. This is the main inn. This is Shore Road. This is the beach. This is the pool out in front of Chatham Bar's Inn. Shore Road is here. That right there is going from elevation 10 to elevation 15. So it's coming up 5 feet in that area. The new flood zone is expanding. You know where the tennis courts are at Chatham Bar's Inn? The road, Shore Road. It's going across the road into these two buildings across Shore Road. This is the limit of where the flooding, they're saying the flooding is going to be. I've seen it go down Claflin Landing. I've seen it, come in around there. That's a major storm event to get it above Shore Road at that tennis court and push it back into those properties. It's 5 feet above what they predicted before. So that's one example, but it's different. It's different all throughout, depending on the model that they did and the topography. Did that answer your question? No? What was your question? How many?
No, you tried, but there's not an average.
There is not an average, no. There's an average still water elevation for the storm surge, okay? And the storm surge is based on astronomical tides, and that is elevation 10. What happens is you have wave heights that they calculate above that elevation, all right? And that is where your flood zone is taken, is from those wave heights. So it could be, as I said, all the way up to elevation 22. So you've got a elevation 10 that they're starting with, and then add on to that.
Are you planning any more meetings after this? And number one, and number two, has anyone invited any members of the media at all?
The members of the media were invited. I don't know if they're here. I know that we're videotaping this, and we'd be glad to send it to whoever wants to see it and report on it. As far as your question on future meetings, nothing has been established yet.
Do you differentiate wave heights between the Atlantic and the Sound?
Yes, it's a different model. Well, it's not a different model, but it's a different area. It's a different effect because you're catching, as a hurricane comes up and catches on the Sound, it's a different effect. So you've got a different still water elevation from the Sound. So that's where your basis starts higher on that side because you've got a bigger surge as it comes up rather than on the inside of the bay. we're going to send it out to everybody that received the letter, so, or everybody that signed and given us an email address, we're going to send it out to. Does anybody have any questions for Rogers and Gray Insurance, John?
I brought this up to you earlier. When my property, I sit on a bluff and it slopes down to a marsh, and the lower, like a little wedge, has now been designated in the flood zone. If I, and the marsh is conservation property, if I give that property to the conservation, am I then out of the flood zone?
No.